Hello, my name is Carrie Brown and I am with the Central Mississippi Regional Library System. Today I'm going to be reading to you chapters 3 and 4 of Calendar Mysteries, August Acrobat. Written by Ron Roy, illustrated by John Stephen Gurney, published by Random House, New York. Chapter 3, The Mystery Acrobat. Brian sold the rest of his tickets the next day. Josh and his parents each gave him $2, and he sold the last 2 tickets to Ellie when the kids were having ice cream at her diner. Brian added his $10 to the money in the box, then slid it back under Bradley's bed. Now the box held $200. "When do we have to give the money to the acrobats?" Lucy asked. "I don't know," Bradley said. He looked at his calendar. Bri, when does the circus open?" "Tomorrow." "Why?" "Oh my gosh," Brian said. "They're supposed to set up their tent tonight. Maybe they're already here." "All right," Nate said, rubbing his stomach. "Let's bring them the money and get our free popcorn and hot dogs." "I don't want to walk around town carrying all that money," Bradley said. "Let's just go see if the Flying Fortunatos are here yet. We can give them the money later." The others agreed, and they took off toward the high school, where the circus was going to be. When they passed Nate's house on Woody Street, they waved to his sister. She was in the backyard with Dink and Josh. They cut across Pleasant Street and headed toward the high school playing fields. When they came out of the trees, they stopped. 100 feet in front of them stood a giant tent. The tent leaned to one side as if it wanted to go to sleep. A canvas flap was tied open. It was dim inside, but Bradley could see seats and some kind of pole with wires on it. Across the lawn from the tent, they saw a long trailer with a door and 4 small windows. Narrow steps were under the door. The words, "The Flying Fortunatos," were painted under the row of windows. The paint was so faded that they could hardly read it. Parked near the trailer was an old Volkswagen bus that needed to be washed. The kids didn't see any elephants or tigers, or men being shot out of cannons, or any Flying Fortunatos. Bradley felt his stomach drop like a water balloon. "We sold 100 tickets for this?" he thought. "It's a pretty small circus," Lucy said. "It's not a circus," Bradley said. "It's a disaster." "At least they have a tent," Nate said. "Let's look inside." The kids walked around the tent to the open flap. They stepped inside and looked around. Without the sunlight, it was dark. They saw tall poles with a net stretched between them. They heard soft music, the kind that made you dream about faraway places. "There's nobody," Nate started to say. Suddenly, bright lights lit up the space. A figure appeared from the back of the tent and climbed one of the poles. Whoever it was wore silver tights that shimmered under the lights. A silver hood covered the figure's head and eyes. Only the nose and mouth could be seen. At the top of the pole, the silver person unhooked a trapeze swing that had been tied to the pole. With a leap, the figure was sitting on the trapeze bar. Then he or she stood up and began swinging back and forth. Down below, the kids stood with their mouths open, watching. Bradley could hardly swallow. Even with the net under the trapeze, it would be a long way to fall. But the figure in silver tights didn't fall. He or she swung, turned flips, and did 100 other tricks on the trapeze. "That's amazing," Nate whispered. "He's like Spider-Man." "How do you know it's a man?" Lucy asked. She gazed up at the trapeze artist. "Sorry, you're right, Lucy," Nate said. "It could be a girl." "She's like a silver waterfall," Lucy said. "Wouldn't you love to be able to do that?" "I don't know," Brian said. "It gives my stomach goosebumps just watching." Suddenly the figure was off the trapeze and down the pole. Without even glancing toward the kids, the acrobat dashed toward the back of the tent. The lights went off, and the kids were standing in the dark again. Chapter 4, The Lousy Acrobat. The kids stepped out of the tent and sat under a big maple tree. They looked at the trailer and old bus. The only things moving were the leaves on the tree. "Shouldn't there be clowns running around?" Nate asked. "Shouldn't there be—" Just then the trailer door opened. A man came out carrying a folding table. He had white hair and a round belly. He set up the table under the tree near the trailer. Then he went back and held the door open. A teenage boy wearing gym shorts and a t-shirt stepped down. He was lugging some lawn chairs, which he placed around the table. Behind him, a woman with gray hair came out with a tray of food. "You think those are the flying Fortunatos?" Nate whispered. Brian giggled. Bradley remembered the picture he'd found in the shoebox. In the corners, there had been little drawings of acrobats doing stunts. Were these the same people? "Should we go meet them?" Lucy asked. "No," Brian said. "Let's watch them a little. I want to make sure this circus is for real before they ask us for that money." The couple sat down. The man said something to the boy, but he shook his head. The door of the old bus opened and a teenage girl came out. Her spiky dark hair made her look as if she'd just gotten out of bed. She ran over to the others and sat down. The boy turned and marched away. "He's headed for the tent," Nate said. The boy had his head down. He seemed to be talking to himself, and he didn't look happy. And he never noticed the kids sitting under the tree. They watched the boy stomp through the open flap and disappear inside the tent. "Now what?" Nate asked. "This is very weird." A few seconds later, the boy appeared back outside the tent. He looked around as if he thought someone was spying on him. Then he unhitched a cord on the tent, stepped inside, and tugged the flap over the opening. "That kid looked kind of sneaky," Bradley said, like he didn't want anyone to see him. "I like sneaky," Nate said. "Let's go see what he's doing." "Yeah," Brian agreed. The kids moved toward the tent. "I don't know," Lucy said. "Feels like we're doing something wrong." "We sold their tickets, remember?" Brian said. "We need to know what's going on around here." They crouched down and scurried toward the closed flap. Bradley felt as if he was in a spy movie. He glanced over his shoulder toward the trailer. He couldn't see the Fortunatos, if that was who they were, so he figured they couldn't see him. Bradley knelt where the flap closed and raised the canvas until he could see inside. The lights came on, making Bradley jump backward. Brian, Nate, and Lucy wriggled around so Bradley could see through the tent flap. This time, Bradley noticed two big cages. One of them had a sign that said "Danger, Ferocious Lion." The other one was longer and flatter than the lion cage. Its sign said "Annie, the world's longest anaconda." "There was a lion in there?" Nate squeaked in Bradley's ear. "Why isn't it roaring or something?" Brian asked in Bradley's other ear. Just then the teenage boy stepped out from behind the lion cage. He shinnied up one of the poles, and before Bradley could even blink, the kid was walking across the high wire. Bradley thought the kid looked scared up there. The boy took a step, then began waving his arms. He lost his balance and fell into the net. Then he went to a mat and started doing backflips. At least, he tried to do backflips, but he kept falling onto the mat. Next, he went to the trapeze rings and pulled himself up. But his legs were kicking and he couldn't do a single stunt. He dropped from the rings and stood there with a sad look on his face. He bent over, picked up a fistful of sawdust, and threw it at the rings. Then he ran for the exit, straight toward the four kids. They jumped away from the flap, but the boy didn't notice them as he bolted out of the tent. Bradley saw the boy's face clearly as he dashed past. The teenager's mouth was set in a grimace, and tears were streaming down his cheeks. Thank you. Be sure to tune in next week for chapters 5 and 6. Goodbye.